So if you were a monk, you actually have, instead of dealing 1 damage for unarmed attacks, you deal 1d4 damage, which has the potential of dealing like up to, I believe, 9 damage depending on your dexterity. So you can flick somebody in the nuts for 9 damage.
Wow, that's a lot of damage for just a nut flick. Hello, and welcome to Given the Platform, the show where we give unsung people the chance to flaunt their extraordinary passions and knowledge. Do you have something that you want to talk about? Contact us at giventheplatform@gmail.com. Make sure to download us on your favorite podcasting platform, and also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars. That would really help. And follow us on social media at Given the Platform on both Instagram and Facebook to get updates on who our upcoming guests are going to be and what they're going to talk about. Today we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons with Nick Scafuto. This is something that I did not go in knowing much about, which is always my favorite preface for an episode. He's just so fun and funny to talk to, and I definitely went from someone who didn't appreciate the game as much as I should have to someone who now understands how fun it could be, and I hope the same happens for you. Enjoy. Today we are joined by Nick Scafuto. He is a friend of mine. He is a very prolific music major, very talented. But today we're talking about his talents in a different area, which is Dungeons and Dragons. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Harrison. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. After we're doing this in quarantine right now, so I'm doing as good as you can in your room for 2 weeks straight. So, Dungeons and Dragons. Let me just tell you right now, I've never played it. I know what it's about because my friends wanted to start it, and I think it sounds fun. I definitely didn't at first. At first they had brought it up and I was like, that's a little weird. And then they sold it to me. But I still don't know much about it, so I'm excited for you to enlighten me on this subject. So before we start, you are a dungeon master? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, it's kind of like when you say the full. I feel like if you say the full name, I legally have to return my V card to where to the government at this point. Uh, we kind of, I don't know. I always feel more comfortable saying DM because I don't have to say dungeon master out loud. But yes, I'm the dungeon master, the DM of just a little campaign that I'm doing with some friends at home. It's a lot of fun because most of them have not played the game before. So it really is just kind of like a test of can I teach people how to play this game, and also can we have a good time doing it? Where it's really cool. We don't take it too seriously, and that's that's always good.
Yeah, and no judgment here. Your expertise is valued in this environment.
Thank
Can you just, for anyone who doesn't know the game that well, including me, but especially someone who hasn't even heard like anything about what it's about, can you just give me like a nice synopsis of how you would describe the game to someone who is completely ignorant to it?
Sure. So the way I've always kind of described it is that it is at its core a collaborative storytelling game. Using RPG role-playing game systems to tell the story. Like, it's kind of like sitting around a campfire and telling a story of Dungeons and Dragons and brave heroes and evil warlocks and stuff like that. But the thing that determines how the story goes is rolling dice. So here, you can use this audio. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the nerdiest thing you're ever going to hear in your entire life. But yeah, you roll dice, and essentially, that randomness helps affect the game and affects the story.
But okay, this is going to be, maybe I should wait to bring this up. But from what I understand, you roll the dice and you get a number, and you tell the dungeon master the number, and then the dungeon master just decides what that number means.
Exactly. Yeah, it's completely, there's a little bit of a give and take, right? So and this kind of ties back into how you play the game. So essentially, you as the player character have a bunch of numbers, your stats, right, and different things that show how good you are at certain things. So you have strength, and you have dexterity, constitution, which is like how sturdy you are, how healthy you are. Your intellect, which is how much have you studied. Your wisdom, which is how much life experience have you had, and your charisma, which is like, oh, how good are you with people, right? And certain characters and certain classes and certain and races in the game have benefits to those stats. So you get bonuses to certain kinds of like actions and stuff like that. You describe what you want to do to the dungeon master. So for example, I want to talk to the guard who's guarding the jail where my party member is, and I need to go rescue them. And I want to like talk my way through it. So I would use like a persuasion skill, and if I'm good at charisma, then I'm gonna be good at it essentially. So then you roll a dice. In most cases, it is a d20, which is a 20-sided die. It's a lot of numbers. And you roll that, you get a number on that dice roll. You add whatever stat bonus you get to that skill, and then that number determines how well you do at the thing that you wanted to do. And the dungeon master decides what happens next as a result.
So you have to have a lot of trust in this dungeon master.
Yeah. It's definitely the relationship between the players and the DM is really unique in terms of like creativity and stuff like that. It's not like likening it to like a composer and an orchestra, right? Like that relationship isn't as intimate as it is with a player and their dungeon master, which is a really weird sentence to say out loud.
No,
um,
it's good. It also doesn't seem like you're fighting against the dungeon master or you're playing against him or her.
Uh, yeah. If if the vibes are good, then hopefully not. But it definitely really is up to the players and up to the DM how the vibes are. Because there you hear horror stories of dungeon masters who kind of just like they have like a really firm grip on what they want the story to be, and that kind of isn't as fun because it kind of reduces the playability, like the what the player characters can do.
That gives me big, like, those games that you used to play as a kid, but then you just made up the rules as they went along. That gives me big
Oh
that
yeah.
vibes.
Oh
But
yeah. Listen. Yeah. Oh yeah. We all used to run around with wiffle bats, right? And just swung at imaginary enemies. Was it just me? Okay, that's fine.
so there's no like prompts as to what the storyline is.
Not necessarily. So I can, we can go into like the creative process of all this stuff, but there are like pre-set campaigns that are released from Wizards of the Coast, which is the company that produces Dungeons and Dragons. And those are great, and those are well crafted by actual people who have studied game design and stuff like that. Or you can just kind of make it up, right? The wonderful thing about Dungeons and Dragons is it's just a really big improv game with a lot of numbers, right? So you and your the entire group of people who are playing the game kind of create this story out of seemingly nothing, right? I can tell you with my process, I kind of have like the story, the campaign, as they're usually called, that we're going through. I have like this huge overarching story that I want to get to, but how we get to the place that I want to be at is completely dependent on the player characters and their choices.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I can
Yes.
never, I can't imagine being a dungeon master. I feel like,
It's
because so I was offered to play this game. It didn't end up working out because we were all so busy, but some of my friends from school, and I don't know any of the fancy terms, but all I know
Mhm,
is I was the elf that was like the loud one, not like the
mhm,
quiet it's like a sun and a moon elf. I think I was the sun elf or whatever. And
mhm.
like my
Yeah, yeah,
thing was like singing. We got that far. And like I knew that I wanted to play this game to just like be a complete like idiot,
yeah.
which I thought was fun, but I don't think I could ever be a dungeon master because I don't that's too much responsibility and I wouldn't be able to just like bullshit everyone and just be stupid. So
Right, right, right.
I admire your leadership and your ability to take one for the team. Do you find that you enjoy being in the campaign or being the DM? Like, what do you enjoy more, or like which benefits come with which?
Right. I mean, there is benefits to both of them. I definitely wouldn't want to DM two games at the same time. But I really do like doing both because as a player character, you can kind of just you get to interact with a world, and you can kind of like my favorite thing is kind of almost testing the limits of what I can do, what is feasible. Not to pester the DM, but to just like keep them on their toes and see what kind of stuff they can come up with.
That's exactly what I think I would do, and that I wanted to do before we started.
Hmm. Oh yeah, it is a good time, I will say. But you have to kind of know. Again, that's that trust thing. You have to know your dungeon master, and they have to know you, and you have to know not to push them too hard. But as the dungeon master, I mean, you get to do a bunch of silly voices. You get to make a bunch of like recently we did in like tabletop gaming there's something called a one shot, which is essentially it's not a bigger like long form campaign. It's just supposed to be done in one like 3 hour session, right? So we did one recently in the world that we're playing in. And you can just do dumb stuff. I literally there's a character named Mama Freddy that I just completely just super plagiarized from the McElroys and my brother and me. And they have she owns a pizza shop, a pizzeria, and I had them go to the pizzeria as like a night guard, kind of like night security, and there were animatronics there, so we just did Five Nights at Mama Freddy's. Like it's like you can just tell jokes and make it into games, which is a lot of fun.
But okay, so you said something that piqued my interest.
Hmm.
You played a campaign that was only 3 hours. That part I get. In the world that you built, so are you saying set a campaign? You set multiple campaigns in one world?
I actually did. This is kind of related, but I was DMing another campaign that kind of just fell through because time constraints. It's hard to get everybody on the same schedule. But I did kind of so I kind of did a Stephen King, just the full shebang. In that I've created a world and I created some characters and I have used them in a bunch of different, really only two. I shouldn't say a bunch. I haven't been doing this for too long, but I used them in another campaign. And I was like, well, I have these characters, I have this world that I really really love. I don't want to just say goodbye to them, so I just use them again, but with a different campaign.
Now, is that normal, or do people do that, or is that like kind of like something that you did just because you wanted to?
I haven't really a lot of dungeon masters I have listened to over podcasts and stuff like that like to do different worlds for different things. I personally felt like I didn't get in the last campaign. Again, it ended a little bit early again just for scheduling stuff, which kind of that's never fun. uh but I just felt like I didn't get what I wanted to get out of those characters, in terms of their arcs, and in terms of their relationships with one another. So I was like, oh, I could just use them again, And if I ever DM another campaign, I will. I probably not use these guys.
Yeah. And that also brings me to the point. How strict are there rules for this game, and how strict are they?
So this is where I feel like a lot of misconception comes in with Dungeons and Dragons,
Mm.
right? There is a player's handbook for fifth edition, which is the edition that is the most current one. There have obviously been five, give or take, editions in total. This handbook is 293 pages long, which is a lot of fun. And yes, it has very detailed rules of how to play the game. However, you don't have to follow any of them if you don't want to. If you just like the system of how you play the game, of rolling a d20 to determine, the outcomes of different situations, then you can just kind of go for it. Me personally, I take the classes and the races and like all the fundamental stuff, and like in terms of how combat works, in terms of what spells people can cast, and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of it. There's like very specific rules about like the timing of things, and how spell casting works that are just a little bit too specific for my taste. So at least with my campaigns, what I do is I kind of just I bend the rules a little bit. I don't know if you want me to get into specifics, but I just kind of bend the rules to fit my playstyle and my friend's playstyle a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I was about to ask, like, how does combat work in the more complicated things? So, like,
Oh yeah,
specifically combat and spell casting.
yeah. So Yeah, so it's really actually quite interesting, the because it kind of ties back into the history of everything. When the game it was created in 1974, it was like an expansion for this other game called Chainmail, and this other game called Outdoor Survival, right? It was almost like an expansion pack that you kind of you use their rules to play the game, which is really interesting. But the game itself came with optional combat rules, and then those eventually became the combat rules that we know of now as D&D. But essentially, when you the DM creates like a combat scenario with a bunch of enemies that either come pre made in the monster like manuals that come with the game, or you can just make your own, which is really cool. And what you do is you roll a d20 to determine the order of when you attack. And then from there, the players decide when it's their turn what to do. They have a bunch of different weapons that do different amounts of damage depending on their classes and depending on their skill sets and stuff like that. And this is where the other dice come into play. These are more like for dealing damage, like the d6, which is like your standard dice. There's a d4 that kind of looks like a pyramid that's really hard to roll. And there's also D10, a D8, and a D12. And there's also D100, but don't worry about the D100. We don't talk about the D100.
Do you
Um,
need all these dice, or do you just need the d20, or can you play with just the d20?
Honestly, you can just play with your phone. You can ask Siri to roll any number, like an any signed die,
I
which
didn't
is
even
really cool.
think about that.
Oh
That is
yeah, and
so cool.
oh yeah, and Google also has a dice roller that's just like right up there because I mean tech companies, they're nerds. They get it.
They get it. They're nerds and they know poor people, which is
Exactly.
a winning duo. A winning duo. So
Yes.
so okay, so let's do a hypothetical. I'm in a
Yeah, go
fight
for
with you and I go
it. Mhm.
first and I roll my dice. What do I do? Okay, so I say like I'm going to like kick you in the nuts and then like I roll my dice and then like the number is like the power of the move.
Okay, so yeah, so basically yes, and but before we roll for the power of the move, you have to roll to see if it hits. So this is you roll a d20. Let's say you get a 16, right? And then you add like whatever modifier. It'd probably be dexterity because you're using your foot to kick me in the nuts. Uh,
But I
so
have that free range of just saying I'm going to kick you in the nuts. I don't
oh
have
yeah,
to like pick a move set.
oh no, I mean you could totally. I mean yes, it's probably better to pick a move set because technically it's an unarmed attack, so you'd only be dealing one damage flat. But you can definitely kick me in the nuts. You can do whatever the hell you want
Hold
to
on. What do you mean by unarmed?
do. You're not using a weapon essentially.
Okay, so what if I said I'm going to smack you in the nuts with my mace?
Okay, so that's a little bit different. Now, what you do is you're going to roll a d20. Let's say you got a 16 and your strength is like 2, and you have proficiency, which is a whole other. Again, this is a whole thing.
But
But you add a bunch of numbers.
do we have to make up all this stuff? Like do I make up the fact that I want to use proficiency and agility and whatever I do? Like do I pick that on my own or is that like a preset thing that the dungeon master has to determine?
So this is a preset thing that's in the rules of the game, and like the way that kind of stuff interacts with each other. So like before we would play the actual game, you have to build a character, and then all of that stuff, all of those stats are with that character and its character sheet.
But then how do
So
you not do like just an overpowered character that's good at everything? Or do you just like not do that for the sake of fun? Like just take one for the team. You know what I mean?
right. Generally, if you're doing a long form campaign, you start at level 1, and then you go the levels are 1 to 20, right? And the more you play, the more experience you get. If you want to use an experience system, or basically the DM can also just tell you when to level up. And as you keep leveling up, you get better and better stuff and more skills, and you get more spells and stuff like that depending on your class. And that's kind of how you get more overpowered as you keep going on. But if you're starting out, usually you're going to be pretty weak. Level 1 characters are pretty weak in comparison. So you probably the balance, it's up to the DM to balance the monsters that you're fighting with the level that you're at.
So, okay, and like, is this all on like a realism basis? So, if I was like super overpowered and I was like, I'm gonna flick you in the nuts, could I do a lot of damage doing that? Like, is there a way for me to finagle that outcome?
Yes, there is, depending on again your class. So if you were a monk, you actually have instead of dealing 1 damage for unarmed attacks, you deal 1d4 damage, which has the potential of dealing like up to I believe 9 damage depending on your dexterity. So you can flick somebody in the nuts for 9 damage.
Wow, that's a lot of damage for just a nut flick. can we also go into spells? So can I cast whatever spell I want, or do I have to pick from a preset list?
There is a preset list depending on the class that you choose. Yeah, but
Wait,
there's
and
there's
that
there's enough.
there's no liberty with that?
Um, and this goes back into the bending of the rules, right? That we were talking about before. You can do again whatever you want to do depending on how the DM wants the game to go, right? Um, but there are ways to like, so for example, the bard class, which is probably the one that your friends wanted you to play as your elf character. Bards have a special ability at a certain level where they can learn spells from other classes. So when I was playing my bard, I took this spell from a warlock class. That's probably the best one in the game, in my opinion, just because of the way that it works. Because in spellcasting, there are cantrips that don't like cost essentially mana to cast, right? Instead of using like
I
mana
know
or
mana, but can you go over cantrips real quick before continuing?
yeah. So the way that cantrips are like they're spells that don't cost anything to cast, unless you're using the official D&D rules, which is like you need to have like a piece of tattered cloth or the fang from a dragon to cast this kind of spell. Or you could just say that yeah, you probably have it and you can just do it anyway. Like it just depends. So I personally don't use those kinds of things. Unless it's interesting for the story, right? But yeah, they don't count against your like mana score or whatever. Instead of like using like a pool of mana, there's a system called spell slots, and there's different levels of spells up 1 through 9, and you have a certain amount of spell slots that are again determined by your class and your level, and you can cast as many like first level spells as you have first level spell slots.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's kind of like your mana pool. So if you have three, so wizards have like a lot of spells that they learn that they have. That's kind of their shtick. They have like the spell book that they can read out of, right? So you have like a bunch of different spells, but you only have 3 spell slots. So you have to choose your spells wisely.
And you can't switch your spells out of the slots? You can't switch them off?
As a wizard, you actually can because like it's like thinking of in the fiction, you have like a spell book, so you write in different like incantations or
Got it.
whatever in the fiction. Yeah, but some of the other classes though, it's a little bit different. So like a paladin, kind of I mean you can relearn spells, but I feel like for the paladin it's a little bit more contained. You don't really get as many spells to work with.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm trying to keep up with these terms.
I know.
But
Yeah, I know. This is where it gets real nerdy.
no, but it sounds like a lot of fun, but I'm very upset that I can't cast whatever spell I want.
Yeah, and again, and so it depends. If you have a DM that's like, yeah, screw it, just do whatever you want, then you can. It just depends on the vibe.
I'm pretty sure the DM for the group that was going to start, that my friends and I were going to start, listens to this, I'd hope. So this is just my request out there. Like, let me like Beetlejuice this. Let me Beetlejuice this game. So can we go? I want to talk so much about the game, like more of the fun aspects of the game.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
because I want to make this informative, because I feel obligated to, is there anything else on the history of the game that you want to speak on?
Sure, yeah. I'll have some notes. I wrote some notes down for this whole thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, the game was almost like an expansion pack for chainmail and outdoor survival. When it came out in 1974, it was extremely ahead of its time, and which is a fun way of saying nobody knew how to play it at the time because of how complicated it was in comparison to other tabletop games at the time. People thought that the rules were extremely vague, and you essentially needed to have knowledge of other tabletop games to play the original Dungeons and Dragons. That has, become to be known as First Edition or just standard Dungeons and Dragons. Between 1974 and 1989, there was a bunch of like renewals. There was something called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that made things way more complicated, and then there was like a beginner's version that made things like way more streamlined. And it was just trying to get like as many people to play the game as possible in between those years. And then second edition came out in 1989. This is where things kind of get interesting in terms of like its history, right? This is the version that they took away a lot of the moral ambiguity of the previous edition. Like they essentially took out like all of the evil stuff because a bunch of Christian moms were like, "I'm sorry, you have demons in this game? I don't think Jesus would want demons in this game. Uh, so they basically just axed all of that stuff from the game, and there was more of a push. The game was being aimed at teenagers, which is like, this is around, I can't remember when the comic came out, but there's something called the Chick Tract, that was about that was by this dude named Jack T. Chick, and it was a bunch of like religious comics that talked about like the folly of man and all these other things. And one of the most famous examples of it was this comic called comics. No, comic is fun. It was this. I don't even know. It was like this little like newspaper, like the ones that you see in the newspaper, those kinds of things,
Uh-huh.
called Dark Dungeon, and it was just, oh my god, you can read up on it. It's crazy. They basically were like, D&D is really summoning Cthulhu, the evil squid monster that
Oh
would
my
ruin the
God.
world. And it was just so stupid. It was just, fear mongering. The book ends in the comic ends on a happy note with a with a mass book burning. It's crazy, dude. And that's all surrounding this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, so okay, before we go on, I have to clarify. When you talked about tabletop games before D&D, are we talking like Sorry or like Clue? Maybe Clue.
Maybe Clue. I mean, Clue is probably Sorry is kind of like its own thing. Like there's those types of like board games. Tabletop games were just a little bit more advanced. The really advanced ones were, I believe they were called war games at the time. There was a bunch of different kinds of like war game simulators. I can't name them off the top of my head, but those were more for like the serious like tabletop players. A little bit, I would say like tabletop games. I feel like has like a bit of a more like serious connotation to board games, which are like Sorry, and there's nothing wrong with Sorry. But these are for the more serious people.
Like a free wielding, like less strict of a rule set, like you kind of go, it's human run instead of run by the rules and the boards themselves.
Interestingly, yes and no, because like at the time, again, remember D&D was like so, I think the word is esoteric, that it was just kind of like, it was so loosey goosey in its rules, like as like a point, that again, that was seen as vague even for people who played tabletop games. Like tabletop games at the time were kind of very specific in their rules, and D&D to an extent is, but because of the nature of the game itself, it kind of can go into places that maybe Gary Gygax, the guy who, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, I forgot to mention them, what they intended the game to be, and it's
So
really
they're the
interesting.
creators?
Yeah, they're the original creators,
Got
and
it.
then Gary Gygax he's the one who's a little bit more known for creating the game. It's kind of like a Stanley, what's his name, Jack Kirby, the other guy who did actually all the Marvel stuff.
Yeah,
I,
I know who you're talking about, but I
yeah,
can't.
that guy. to my point, I don't know his name. I'm sorry. But yeah. So but that's a compliment to the rules and to the community that surrounds the game, because like a lot of people at the time, in the 70s and into the 80s, were like making their own kind of expansions and their own classes, and they were doing like these, we call them homebrewing now, and the people, Gary Gygax was like, and Dave Arneson to an extent was like, oh, this is cool, I want to add this to the core game, and they like took fan made things and like added them to the core of the game, which is really cool, like a really cool relation.
That's cool. And I mean, I think that sets a precedent because nowadays it's so important for a game developer to keep in contact with its audience to introduce what they want into the game. You know
Oh
what
yeah.
actually that reminds me of?
Mm-hmm.
The Animal Crossing update that just came out that allows the villagers that allows you to sit down. I don't know if you know
Oh.
Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I'm aware. I'm a Nintendo fan. I don't really like Animal Crossing, but I've heard good things.
Yeah. So there's this whole aspect where all the villagers were able to sit down and they'd
Mm-hmm.
sit down in the most inconvenient places. And almost as like a nod to that, they literally in the newest update was like, okay, now you can sit down. And now there are all these posts of these like people playing the game sitting down to in order to interfere with like the pathway of their villagers, like being like,
Oh
oh,
no,
who's laughing now, which is so genius because it
that's
literally
awesome.
gave the audience exactly what they wanted, and now they're basically advertising it for Nintendo. So
Mm-hmm.
this concept so this concept that you listen to your audience to build upon a game that they want and like adapt to what they need, I think I don't know if that came before Dungeons and Dragons, but in you talking about it, it reminds me of how that's so effective nowadays.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's a sign of a good company right there. I mean, another good example is what happened with the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. Remember, the original design was
Oh my god.
hideous, and then the fans basically bullied. I think Sony came up with the movie. They basically bullied them into making it into more of like a Sonic that they recognize. You know, it's like a good like organization will take the criticism of its fans and like use it. It's really interesting to see it actually play out, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
okay, if there's any more history, please
Oh yeah.
continue. Also,
Yeah.
my question is, when did the rules, like as you continue on with the history,
Mm.
at what point did the rules become so loosey goosey? Like, at what point did it diverge between the players who really wanted to stick by the rules and the people who decided that it could be whatever they wanted it to be?
Right. It actually became more that it's like an ebb and flow. So it started out as pretty loosey goosey, and then as time went on, in these next two editions that I'm going to get to, they kind of tightened up the rules a little bit more. And then in fifth edition, and this is all in my opinion, they loosened it more in fifth edition.
Is fifth
Which
edition the newest one?
Yeah, that's the newest one. I believe it came out in 2012. The next one that I was going to mention, third edition, came out in 2000. This is actually where they introduced the D20 that the game is so known for. Before they were just rolling different dice, which is really pretty interesting. And this was released in 2000. So it's wild that this concept of the game that I believe the D20 is like really associated with D&D. I mean, it's only been around for 20 years, which is crazy. This edition did a lot before in terms of like your classes and the races that you were playing as. Certain races were attached to certain classes, which I think is bullshit. And so did third edition, and they took that away. Now any class can be any, or any race can be any class, which is really cool. And then next, in 2007, the fourth edition came out. This is where things got really tight, in my opinion, because the combat, you essentially needed to have like a game board, like a thing that represents the battle area, to be able to play this game, because it was so focused on combat and on like movement and on moving enemies to where you wanted them to go. Which is like cool if you want like a combat simulator, but in my opinion and what I've seen, I kind of like the more loosey goosey feel
It's
of
about the
fifth edition.
journey.
It's about the journey, baby. But yeah. And then in fifth edition, they kind of loosened all those rules again, and they made it a little bit more vague in terms of like combat things, and it's more about like the adventure, and it's more about the characters and those kinds of things. And again,
Yeah.
all in my opinion.
Now, I just have to point out how
Mhm.
hilarious it is that they built their own class system and then had to tear it down themselves.
Oh yeah. Oh
That's
man.
what an ironic. There's definitely like some metaphor in there somewhere. There's some philosophy class in there somewhere.
Oh my
Um,
God. Yeah, I really I do think a lot about that, because like, oh man, like individual, like I think it's individual, like I don't think systemic racism is built into the game, or at least I hope it's not, but definitely like that kind of like for example, the half elves as a class is the son of a human and an elf, or the child, sorry. And that in the game, in the manual, it's like they are hated by everyone, and it's like, dude, what? Are we sure we want to do this? It's kind of, and that's challenging as a player and as a DM to like deal with those rules that are built into the game. I choose to ignore them, because that I just feel like that's kind of, I don't like that personally. I don't like how that's baked into the rules. But I do find that it's interesting that it's baked into the rules, and it can lead to a lot of interesting stories.
I mean, it's not unprecedented in the world of fantasy, like
Yeah, for
these
sure.
kind of class systems. So I don't think they originated
Yeah.
it, but for
Just,
sure.
just in the world of fantasy. Yep, just in the world of fantasy.
Yeah,
That's it.
no, but what I'm saying, I mean, isn't that the same
I get
thing in
you.
like Lord of the Rings and stuff?
Yeah, it's a similar thing. There's more races in the Dungeons and Dragons lore than in Lord of the Rings. Do they just kind of built on it? But it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a totally different topic, so we won't get into it. But like,
Hmm.
especially like in Harry Potter, like all these references to like the Nazi party and stuff. Am I being right in this? I don't. I've watched like video essays about how fantasy uses like racism and classism and like tries to incorporate all these things, which is so I don't know. I would never. I
Yeah,
prescribe to the belief that if you don't have to include it, and whatever. You know what? Actually, I'm not
yeah,
going to say that because I think there's an important aspect to be had that sometimes you do want to reflect society and sometimes you
hmm
want to create a utopic environment. So,
yeah, for sure.
dealer's choice. I just think it's interesting the choices that are made and why they're made. Moving on,
hmm
what's your history with the game? Like your experience? When did you first start playing? Like when did you learn about it? Things like that.
Yeah, I feel like my story is kind of similar to a lot of people's, where it's like a bunch of my friends did it in high school, and I was like, "Pff, I'm never gonna play D&D. And then I listened to the Adventure Zone, and then I was like, I want to play D&D.
Now, can you
Um,
explain the Adventure Zone? Because I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's a podcast by the McElroys and their father, and it's just wonderful. I can't, just the impact that the story has had on me. I mean, I can't explain it here. I would say go listen to it. It's very good. But that the way that they played D&D, and they were just like, they had fun, but they also told like an overarching story that got serious at times, and was really emotional. Like that kind of thing. I wanted that very, very badly.
Oh, so it seems like the podcast was the recorded like game.
Yeah, yeah, it was them playing the game. Yeah, there's a bunch of podcasts that do that. Like Hello from the Magic Tavern does that. Critical Role also does that. And more that I can't think of right now. But like, it's essentially just them playing the game and recording them talking.
Yeah, got it. Got it.
hmm Yeah, so that's kind of my history. And then I played two campaigns or two, like, sessions. We didn't go for super long as characters, and I was like, yeah, I could probably figure this out.
And how old were you?
This is like 2 years ago, so I
So
was
two
like,
years ago you started, and then you wanted to be a campaigner. When did you want to become like a dungeon master? Like right away?
it was more of it was a little bit out of necessity, which that's where I feel like
Oh.
a lot of things come from. We wanted to play, and our dungeon master wasn't going to be there, so I was like, yeah, I could probably figure it out. And then I did, and it's not easy. I want to it's not an easy thing.
It doesn't
But
sound easy.
no, it's kind of like, because balancing is always an issue, in terms of, am I giving them the right monsters? Am I, is it too easy? Is it too hard? And those kinds of things. And once I've stopped, I do think about balancing, but I don't make it my focus, um, because I think it's more fun to just kind of let them explore the sandbox.
Yeah, that's what seems interesting to me. So you seem like a fun person to play with. I will definitely join your next campaign if you need a bard elf.
A wisecracking elf bard, yes.
Well,
I have
maybe
it.
not wise, but definitely. Um,
Nah,
so
you did great.
okay, you got this game, you started playing it. Well, maybe not. You didn't get the game.
Mhm.
You started playing this game. What has been your favorite aspect of the game, and what is like the one aspect of the game that you don't really like that much, or even
Mhm.
better content for me that you like absolutely hate?
Yeah. The thing that I really love about D&D, and this is partially, like I what the macro was before. Hearing them talk about the game has really set my way of thinking about it. But I think it's just so interesting. It's for unexpected, for things to happen unexpectedly, and for interesting interactions that are just not planned to happen, for them to happen because of improv, and because of the skills of the player character and the DM in terms of creating the story, right? Like, I really think the collaborative aspect of it is super, it's just so important and so crucial. But I gotta say, my favorite moment to ever come out of D&D was, I was playing as a character, and there was like a thing underneath the town that we had to stop, and it was like probably going to explode, and so we were like, okay, so we're just going to go ahead, we're low on health, let's take a short rest, which is a way of healing, and just to get some hit points back. And our DM was like, okay, you're going to take a short rest, and we're like, yeah, we'll take a short rest, forgetting that in the game time a short rest is like an hour. So he was like, okay, you take a short rest and the thing explodes, and we're like, what? what do you mean? But like that's great, you know, or not for the people who got exploded, but for for the story. And you know, we got like as a party, we got blamed for not taking care of the thing, and I got like real life mad as my character, which was really cool. Being able to feel that emotional connection with my character in that moment, that was awesome. Uh, and in terms of things that the thing that I don't like super much is kind of like uh what I mentioned before about like people kind of ruining the game. It's not necessarily something that's wrong with the game, but it's just like I feel like people's attitudes towards the game can be a little shaky sometimes, which is never fun. I feel like that just it kind of just ruins the whole thing. Um,
Are you
and
talking about
this
like the stickler attitude, like you must stick to what it says?
exactly like
Mm.
people who kind of, there's nothing wrong with sticking to the rules, but it's the people who like continuously drive the point home that like the rules, you know, or even just people's attitudes about the game itself. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to role play or not wanting to do any of those kinds of things. But you know, I just feel like when attitudes collide, and when there's not like a clear connection between like what kind of, you know, between all of the people who are playing the game at the same time of what this is, then it can kind of lead to like butting heads, and that's kind of never good because I feel like that just kind of ruins the spirit of the game, you know.
Do you have that experience often, or do you just have like a nice campaign group that just understands the same way you do?
It depends. I haven't really had super big issues, but I've heard like horror stories of that kind of stuff happening.
Call them
Uh,
out. Call them out. No, just
nah,
kidding.
I can't. Never. You won't make me. No, but it's, you know, in terms of the game itself, I really don't have anything. I think it's a good game. Obviously, I take some liberties with it, but I think overall the rules are like fine. I just wish it was not as intimidating going into it as it actually is. Like if you buy the player's handbook and you take a look at it, it's just like overwhelming with the amount of stuff that's in it. You know, I just wish there was an easier way to ease into it. That comes from like the company itself. There are forums online that you can go to, but I just wish there was like something from Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, I get that. When do you
Mhm.
think, is there news of an upcoming game or an upcoming edition?
Not that I've heard of, but I haven't looked for it, so maybe I don't know.
I mean, it does feel pretty timeless. I feel like you don't even need the latest edition to be able to play. I don't think you
For
need the edition at all by the sounds of it.
Yeah, you really don't. I mean, you can kind of do your own thing with really anything. That's if RP, you know, playing D&D has taught me anything is as RPGs and like this kind of storytelling thing, you can do it. You know, we were doing this as kids when we played games that we were like, and now this happens, and I have bullet immunity and all these things. You know, that's creating a story. It's not a very good story, but but it's creating a story, and it's creating something out of nothing, you know? And that's just so interesting to me. You know,
Yeah,
the you know.
yeah, I have a deep fascination with these games that exist outside their monetary counterparts. Like, I never
Yeah.
consider that Dungeons and Dragons is such a cultural staple that you don't even need to buy it to be able to play it, which
Yep.
exists so far outside of like the industry and capitalism in a sense. Like same thing
Hmm.
with like Mafia. Like I can sit 9 people down right now and play Mafia with them without having to buy a Mafia game, which I
Yeah.
think is just so intriguing to me. But I mean Mafia is more of a wider, like it didn't start out as like a purchasable item like Dungeons and Dragons did. So that's
Yeah.
even
Sure.
cooler.
Yeah. I mean, it really just kind of speaks to that good old human experience and about like how we used to have fun back in the day.
Exactly, exactly. So what would you
Yeah.
say has been what was your favorite memory playing this game of your 2 years of experience?
Uh yeah, is oh, man. That's a hard one. There's a lot of fun moments. I mean, just like my favorite thing to do in just in all of D&D is the coolest thing I get to do as a DM is I get to do stupid voices as characters that I've come up with. So I gotta say my favorite thing that I've done over these 2 years is I portrayed a character called the Riddle Master, uh, who who tells very bad riddles. They're very easy to answer. It's very, if you would indulge me, he, oh wait, what is the Riddle Master's voice? It's like, oh yes. "'Tis I, the riddle master, and I come to tear down the establishment with my riddles. Now come, answer them if ye dare." And it's just, you can do that kind of stuff, and it's just off the cuff, and people have to now deal with the fact that I've said all of those words. It's like one of those things. I have a fun dwarf lady named Tamara, so I can do a Scottish accent whenever I please her, which is a lot of fun. Like that kind of stuff. I've been doing those kinds of voices for forever, and it's just very nice that now I have an audience that isn't just me in the mirror.
That's so great. I was
Thank
so
you.
happy. I was going to ask you to do the voices. I'm glad you volunteered. I was like, this is
Yeah.
an audio podcast. We have to give him something.
You gotta give them the voices. Oh, it's very fun. I have a half orc named Cliff who he's like, "Hi guys." He's kind of like this. He's very meek, but he's just like very adept at everything that he does, which I think is, I love that juxtaposition. It's very fun.
I think that if I ever do a recorded Dungeons and Dragons campaign, I will for sure ask you to be the ringleader of it all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The special, given the platform special.
Literally, I was thinking, I was like, I could definitely like release that on like a Wednesday or something.
Oh, for sure. In the off week, baby. That's what it's all about.
One day, you got to get that content out.
Gotta get that content. Get that bread.
So, this is my personal question. Well, first of all, actually, before I go into that, can you die in this game?
Oh yeah.
And then what happens if you die? Do you just sit out for the rest of it?
No. So there is a system in place for dying. If your health point, your HP reaches 0, you then have to do what's called death saving throws. So you have to roll a d20, and the number you get. So you have like three. You can succeed 3 times, or you can fail 3 times. And if you fail 3 times, you're dead. Like that character is officially dead. If you save 3 times, they're stabilized and they're okay. If your character dies, then depending on the campaign, you could like go to the underworld to like save them or whatever. Or the person who's playing those characters can just re-roll another character and just hop in.
Re-roll or just recreate?
Re-roll and recreate are kind of like the same thing. You make a new character.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, depending on the campaign, the DM can like, again, they can just like be like, "Oh, we're gonna go save this character," or they can just be like, "No, they're dead. They're dead for real."
I'd be so mad if someone just said that my character was dead.
Yeah, but there's systems in places to save the character. As your party member, you can like run over it and stabilize their wounds. The healer can heal them. Like there's ways to prevent that, and that's kind of like what promotes teamwork and all these other things. So that it's really interesting.
Yeah, this is okay. So it's a team. It's fully team. You don't like fight with the other people you're playing with, or can you?
Oh, you could.
Have you ever done that?
No, not yet. I think it'd be interesting too, but it's also just a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. This is a cynic. This is the cynic in me asking this question.
Go for it.
What's the joy? Well, now, okay. I don't even know if I could. Okay. I can preface this better. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question that I had asked before coming into this podcast. I now understand how enjoyable this game must be.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really been changed that I want to play it a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was first introduced to this game, my first thought was, what's the point in playing a game that you don't win? Because you can't win this game. It's just a journey.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. I prescribe to the belief that life is kind of, as a human, life and experiencing life is this kind of is its own reward almost, just because I don't know what happens next, so I'm going to take advantage of what I do know, and that's the now, and that's experiencing these things. So like being on the journey of life kind of reflects the journey of the game itself, but I have magic powers in here, and which is nice. But in terms of like winning a campaign, a good story will always end, right? There comes a point when things lead to other things, and you need to end a story to have that finality, to have that conclusion. And the same thing goes with the D&D. A good campaign has an ending. The campaign I'm DMing right now, I have an ending in mind, but I don't know how we're going to get there, and that's what's exciting.
Okay, yeah. I asked that question for other people because I do think that the journey seems incredibly fun now. But I
Yeah.
remember last year my brother had told me he had started playing the game, and that was the first question I asked him. He was
Hmm.
with all his friends, and he was like, "We're playing this game," and I was like, "Have you ever won?" And he goes, "We don't win." And I go, "Then why are you playing that game?"
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but then that's where it's just like life. You make your own victories. So like, oh, we beat this combat encounter that we probably shouldn't have beaten. We won, like we won today at least.
Yeah, yeah,
But life
totally.
goes on.
So, one more quick question. Your
Yeah,
campaign, the campaigns last how long?
it can go for years, man. It
Oh,
really just
geez.
depends. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But again, it depends. It depends on who you want to play with. If you just want the campaign to be like a couple of weeks, that's completely fine. That's viable. If you want it to go for 5 years, it's a great way to keep in touch with your friends.
True, true. And I think that's another reason why I've switched from being like, oh, you can't win to being like the joy in playing because of Corona and this quarantine. Like, really, just getting together with your friends and doing anything is a joy.
Yeah, it's very nice. That's kind of that's how I started, at least with this group. I was like, because the campaign that I was in before kind of fizzled out, and I was like, I really would like to play this game, and I want to share it with people who I think would also enjoy it. And so I reached out to some friends of mine, and I was like, do you guys want to play this game? Don't worry, I will do all of the math. I promise I will do all of the math. All you have to do is just like, then they're all actors, so it was very fun. All you have to do is just be this character, and that's it.
Hold
And
on,
I will take care
math?
of it.
You're talking about logistics, right?
No, I mean math, math, well, logistics and math, because the game, the character sheets, you have to do a lot of math and a lot of calculations
Oh, God.
to do it. So I just like, just press one button, roll those bones, baby, and then you just let me take care of the rest, and I'll I'll just but
Now you
that's
lost me. Math? Oh. Okay, we're
can't
ending
do
the
math
podcast here.
on math. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought school
Yeah, you
into
should have prefaced with that instead of wasting an hour of my life.
uh
Yeah, so are you playing over Zoom right now?
yes, yeah, that was sorry, I forgot to mention that part. Yes, we were playing over Zoom.
And
Yeah.
how many times do you meet? Once a week?
We try to do once a week. Again, schedules are kind of hard to work around, but usually Sunday nights. Hopefully, tomorrow, the day that we're recording this, we'll be able to play. But again, part of it is like, and part of just being a good friend is for things to like, for plans, to be flexible and for plans to like change, because but that's just kind of the way life works sometimes.
Yeah, but and it also seems like it's really whatever. I feel like you could play every day or you could play every month and still
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That and and like I said before, it's a great way to keep in touch with friends. Me
yeah.
personally, I don't think I can play every day. It does take a lot of energy, even just for talking, because sessions can last from like 2 hours to 3 hours. So even for talking for 3 hours straight, doing for some reason all of my voices have gravel in them. I don't know why. I'm literally a singer. I don't know why I do that. It's just fun. Uh,
Self-sabotage.
oh yeah, I've made it a point now to not do a D&D section before I have to sing the next day. It's just tough, man.
Yeah. Okay, let's get a little
Uh,
sentimental as we wrap up.
mm-hmm. Sure. Oh, sure. Uh, it's a way to me. It's a toughie. Because it means so many different things. But I think uh it's I've said this like 3 times by now, but it's really nice to be able to connect with friends, to connect with old acquaintances, uh, and stuff like that, and to do this thing that we're all into, and we're all excited about. It's also just like, as a creator, and I know you also agree. It's just like being able to craft a world and make music for it. Like this campaign, there's a lot that's based around music, and it's just really nice to be able to have that kind of I don't want to say power, but to just have that ability, and to incorporate all of these different art forms into one thing, and to see it played out, and to see people having fun and to laugh, and to maybe cry eventually when we get to the more dramatic beats. Right now we're just kind of doing like a lot of dick jokes. It's about 80% dick jokes at this point. um
I
but
do you mind if I interrupt and ask,
of
have you
course,
is it does it usually get like dramatic?
it's gotten dramatic one time so far. No spoilies about how dramatic it will get. But it depends. Again, in the Adventure Zone, it starts out with just like jokey joke, but then by episode 50, things are getting real. It just, again, it depends on the story, it depends on the people. My favorite thing is to watch something that is silly, um it remains silly, but to add a lot of heart to it and to add a lot of that kind of emotional impact.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping I can do it. I maybe I can give you an update when the campaign's over, if I accomplish that. Because I'm still green. I'm still really new at this. Um, but I'm excited to keep going with it. I'm super passionate about all these things. And yeah, man, it's just cool. I've never it's like when because I'm also a singer songwriter, so it's like a similar feeling to actually being able to like play one of my songs with the band I'm in, and to see it like come to life in a way that I wasn't expecting. It's a similar thing, but it's just like, I don't know, it's very creatively fulfilling and in a way that I've never experienced before.
Yeah, I see that. I think there's such a joy in the escapism that comes with role playing or acting in general.
Yeah.
I also think, and I can't speak on a player of this game, but having been with you the past hour,
Hmm.
there's also, especially for us, we are performers, we are told what to perform. There's such an art to free form acting, free form performance without like rules and just getting to be yourself as a performer instead of following what someone's telling you to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you can interpret a song whatever way you want. You can bring yourself into any role, but at the end of the day, you're bringing it into a pre-written role and things like that. Um, it just reminds me. I mean, we had a male beauty pageant in high school. I don't know if you had that, like the Mister and then your school name.
No, we
That
didn't have that. I have seen the video. It's very good.
yeah, I'm not gonna. Maybe I'll post it on. Maybe you'll get that snippet if you follow my account, given the platform at Instagram. Plugs.
Flux,
Um,
flux, flux, flux. TM, TM.
but I just remember vividly that performance was probably my favorite performance to date, and it was the sloppiest and the laziest, but it was the most fun because I just was myself and I was silly and I let it go, and that is
Yeah.
kind of a beautiful thing nowadays, especially as performers who have to follow what we're given to perform.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's so it is that it is really is that kind of creation, and it's that's a lot of actors I feel like are into this kind of thing because again, it's just one big improv game.
Hmm. Yeah,
And just being able to have that level of creation is just so powerful.
yeah. So
Yeah.
every episode, I ask my guest, if you were in my shoes and you were interviewing yourself, what would you ask yourself that I have not yet? And then go ahead and answer that for us.
So the Harrison. The question I would ask me is, Nick, all of the numbers things doesn't really how do I get into this? It seems so complicated, and the handbook doesn't help very much. There's so many words, and I would say, bear no ill will, child, for I present with you fastcharacter.com, this wonderful website that is exactly how it sounds. You just make a character very, very quickly, any level, any race, any class, including the expanded ones from the expansion packs for 5e. They finally recently added a gender neutral option, thank God. It took them a little bit longer than I would have liked personally. But it's a great way to just kind of, you can make a character really, really quickly, and then you can just jump into a game, which is awesome. Other resources I have for DMs, on roll20.net is a wonderful website with a lot of resources on it. The monster list specifically is something that I use a lot, just because it has a bunch of different monsters, not all of them, and again, you can make your own, but it's just a great resource for dungeon masters. And I think I mentioned the automatic dice roller from like Google and on your phone and stuff like that. These are just ways of making everything a little bit more accessible.
For this fast character thing, does it like randomize a character for you, or do you still get the option to just like click what you want?
So it does. It's a little bit random. You can choose again. You can choose your race. You can choose your class. You can choose your background, which is something I didn't get into, but that's part of it. Your alignment, but that's like the lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good. I didn't get into any of that, but I feel like we as a society know that at this point.
Yep.
And it kind of like what it does is it optimizes the stats for that class and for that race, for you. Which is why I really advocate for if you're starting off a campaign, you need something really, really quickly, use it. And then after you've been playing and like this is something that you're like, okay, I think this is going to happen for a while, I would go in and adjust the numbers afterward.
So, as a final question,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Scafuto,
That's me.
where can we find you? And or do you have things that you want to plug? Because I have things that I want to plug for you, but I want you to say them.
Thank you, Harrison. Yes, actually, you can find. We have a band. It's a band called Nick and the Leg Heavy Boys. The name is misleading. I'm not the front man, but we think it's very funny that it sounds like I am. You can just follow Nick and the Leg Heavy Boys. There's a hyphen between leg and heavy. On just a bunch of social medias. We have a YouTube channel that we post weekly videos. We have an Instagram, a Facebook, a TikTok. And if you want, I have an Instagram. It's Scafoots, SCAF as in Frank UTZ. You want to follow that? I don't really post very often, but do follow the band page if you can.
Yeah, great. Okay, Mr. Scafuto, I have one
That's
final
me.
request. Yep.
Sure.
I traditionally end these podcasts myself with me doing the outro. But
Mhm.
not only would I like you to do the outro, but I would like the Riddle Master to do today's outro for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Let me just grab him. Hey, Todd. Todd. Yes. He wants you to do the outro. Oh, okay. Hello, 'tis I, the Riddle Master. Thank you all so much for watching, or I guess listening, as it's a podcast, and that's wonderful. We have new episodes out for Given the Platform every Saturday at 12 p.m. It's available on all your favorite podcasting platforms, and please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Given the Platform. Now, Harrison, I have a riddle for you, as is customary for the Riddle Master.
Of course.
What has 6 faces but does not wear makeup? Has 21 eyes but cannot see? What is it?
My best guess, a dice.
You've defeated the Riddle Master at his own games, at my own dastardly games. Well done, sir. See you all next week. I'm dying.
That was so good.
Thank you.
Also, this might make it at the very end, but it's a die, which is ironic because then you died.
Yeah. That is really good. Dang. Oh man, should I call him back?
No.